This is the story of a young girl who lost everything but never gave up hope. What she endured will astound and deeply move you. Be sure to read to the end, the conclusion will leave you speechless. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments. The hazy memories of that fateful day never faded. Every detail seemed etched into the minds of a grieving family who, even years later, held on to a fragile hope of reuniting with their daughter. It had been 5 years since young Alyssa disappeared during a family trip to a bustling city. Every day since then was a long chain of unanswered questions, sleepless nights, and a vague fear of the unknown. In another part of the city, behind tall walls and a large iron gate, lived a girl who barely resembled her former self. Alyssa's once bright face was now gaunt and pale, her eyes had lost the sparkle they once held. She was a girl who had forgotten what it felt like to be loved, valued, or even treated like a person. Now she belonged to her mistress, Victoria, the only name Alyssa dared to utter. Victoria was a wealthy, powerful, and respected woman in society, but behind closed doors, she was cold and ruthless. To Victoria, Alyssa was not a person, not even a child, she was simply property, a tool to fulfill Victoria's desires and needs. Victoria called Alyssa her pet, a term that reduced the girl's worth below even that of the household objects. Alyssa's days were filled with endless chores, one after another, as Victoria demanded absolute perfection in every corner of her lavish mansion. From dawn till late at night, Alyssa scrubbed, swept, and polished every detail of the grand house. Victoria's punishments were swift and brutal. Alyssa learned that any mistake led to lashes with a thin leather strap. Victoria didn't hesitate to use bruises and cuts to cover Alyssa's frail body, but she obeyed, not because she wanted to, but because she had learned that resistance only brought more pain. Years of harsh treatment had made Alyssa forget about escape or rescue. She even began to question if her memories of her family were real or just fragments of dreams she once clung to. She couldn't clearly remember their faces, only faint shadows of warmth and safety that now seemed too far away to believe in. Alyssa had lost her name, her hope, and her spirit. She had become a silent shadow, obediently drifting through the halls of Victoria's house like a ghost. Victoria made sure Alyssa was never seen by anyone who visited, carefully hiding her or ordering her to stay out of sight whenever guests arrived. Even Victoria's closest friends had no idea of Alyssa's existence. Victoria constantly reminded her that she was nothing, that no one cared about her, and that she should be grateful to be taken in. Alyssa heard these words so often that she began to believe them, repeating them silently as she worked. But occasionally, in fleeting moments, something within her stirred. A small spark of the girl who once was Alyssa. Yearning for freedom, love, and family, those thoughts sneaked into her mind as she watched dishes or dusted Victoria's collection of ceramics. But she quickly pushed them away, fearing Victoria would somehow see through her eyes and punish her for such stupid thoughts. Alyssa knew that hope was dangerous in Victoria's world. She had become Victoria's pet, a quiet shadow moving through the grand, cold mansion like a prison. Victoria never called Alyssa by her real name, only pet, as if she were a living object, a tool meant only to obey Victoria. Famous for her power and wealth, Victoria was a woman with a charming appearance but a heart full of cruelty. Alyssa's days were an endless sequence of tasks. From dawn to dusk, she scrubbed the gleaming marble floors, polished intricate decorations, and folded table linen so that not a single crease was out of place. Her delicate hands were covered in calluses and cracks from the relentless work. Each morning, Alyssa awoke in the dark room Victoria called her sleeping place, in reality, a cramped, windowless space with only a thin mattress and an old blanket. Victoria demanded perfection, and the slightest mistake was enough to earn Alyssa a brutal punishment. Whenever she dropped an item, left a smudge, or even stood incorrectly, Victoria would unhesitatingly raise her thin leather whip and bring it down on Alyssa's back. The whip cut through the air, followed by the searing pain ripping through her skin. Alyssa tried not to cry, knowing that tears only made Victoria angrier. "Don't act as if you're a person," her mistress would often say, her voice cold and filled with disdain. "You're nothing but a useless pet. I could replace you with anyone, and no one would notice." These words repeated in Alyssa's mind like a sad song she couldn't shake. There were times when Victoria would summon Alyssa to stand beside her, demanding she hold her position for hours as she read the paper or entertained guests. Victoria's sharp eyes never strayed, always searching for any sign of disobedience or exhaustion in the girl. Alyssa learned to show no emotion, keeping her face blank and her eyes lowered. She knew that even a wrong glance could lead to a beating. Despite the close watch, Victoria made sure no one knew about Alyssa's existence. When guests came over, she would hide Alyssa in the small, dark room and lock the door, ordering her to remain silent. Each time Alyssa sat huddled in the darkness, listening to the laughter drifting in from the living room, she imagined unfamiliar faces filled with joy, the kind she once knew but had long since faded away. As time passed, Alyssa gradually lost her sense of self. She could no longer remember her mother's face or the warmth of her father's embrace. All that remained were faint memories of happiness, like an old film blurred by time. Sometimes, while cleaning or arranging Victoria's valuable ceramics, she found herself wanting to remember, to cling to those peaceful memories, but she quickly suppressed them, fearing that if she allowed them to surface, Victoria would sense it, and the punishment would come without warning. Victoria never showed any sympathy or affection for Alyssa. She regarded her as a possession, a tool to maintain the mansion's perfection. "You should be grateful I gave you a place to stay," she often reminded her, her eyes cold. "No one else would tolerate your worthless existence." And yet, a small part of Alyssa refused to be completely extinguished, a faint light, a memory of freedom still hid deep within her. But these were only fleeting moments, for in Victoria's world, hope was a dangerous luxury. Alyssa learned to bury her emotions to survive each long, painful day by becoming an invisible shadow. Every morning, before the dawn fully lit the outside world, she was already awake, rising from the thin mattress on the floor in her dark room, the only place she was allowed to call a bedroom. It was narrow, without windows, lit only by the dim glow of an old lamp. More like a cage than a shelter, Alyssa couldn't remember the last time she felt comfortable or warm. Her new day began while the city outside was still asleep. Alyssa moved through the vast mansion, her steps as quiet as a whisper to avoid making any sound that might wake Victoria earlier than planned. The mansion, with its gleaming marble floors, high crystal chandeliers, and expensive ceramic collection, shone dimly in the light, radiating a luxury that Alyssa only saw as part of her prison. Every lavish wall, every elegant piece of furniture was a reminder that she was merely a submissive shadow in Victoria's world. Alyssa's work never stopped. She had to clean the floors until they shone like mirrors, polish the silverware, and arrange Victoria's ceramics in perfect order. Each task required absolute precision, and even the smallest mistake would result in a brutal punishment. Victoria's thin leather whip was always nearby, and she never hesitated to use it for any fault. The bruises and cuts that covered Alyssa's hands and legs were proof of the harsh punishment she endured. Victoria didn't just make Alyssa work, she also forced her to stand beside her for hours, scrutinizing every movement, every breath. Victoria's sharp gaze observed everything, missing no detail. If Alyssa showed any sign of exhaustion or resistance on her face, a slap would quickly fall. Victoria's cruelty was not only physical but also mental torture, making Alyssa feel like a faint shadow, no longer human. Whenever guests came, Victoria would carefully hide Alyssa in the small, locked room. Alyssa had to sit silently in the dark, listening to the laughter and voices echoing from the living room. She tried to imagine smiling faces, beautiful clothes, and the warm light that she hadn't experienced in years. Alyssa knew that the outside world was a distant dream, something she could never touch. Some days, while cleaning, memories of her family would suddenly surface, her mother's face, her warm eyes, her father's gentle hugs. It all seemed so far away, hazy like a fairy tale she once heard. She tried to push those images away as they only deepened her pain. Every time she thought of the past, a feeling of helplessness overwhelmed her, drowning her in the realization that freedom was something she might never reach. Outside, the world continued on, the sun still rose every day. But for Alyssa, life was an endless sequence of repetitive days, a life without end. She hoped for nothing more than to survive each day, avoiding any mistakes to escape Victoria's wrath. The wounds on her body would eventually heal, but the pain in her heart and the loss of freedom and love were things she wasn't sure would ever be healed. Even so, there were rare moments, like a faint light piercing through thick darkness, when Alyssa let herself dream of freedom. That was when she polished the crystal glasses, watching the sparkling light reflect off them and dreaming of the old days when she played under the sun, her parents' laughter filling the air like gentle music. These fleeting moments were dangerous, but they were all Alyssa had to hold on to prevent herself from completely losing who she once was. When she looked out the window, a rare view she only glimpsed when cleaning the living room, she saw a small sparrow hopping on a branch outside. The image of the bird, free under the vast blue sky, made her heart ache with both longing and pain. She imagined herself as that bird, unbound, able to fly high and far from all of Victoria's chains. But those moments always had to end quickly. She had to push them away, just as she buried all hope beneath a calm surface. If Victoria caught a dreamy look or any sign of yearning for freedom, Alyssa knew the punishment would be swift and unforgiving. The beatings were not only painful in body but also a reminder that she had no right to think of anything beyond obedience and submission. Victoria never failed to emphasize Alyssa's position. She often called her over to stand beside her as she sat in the grand velvet armchair, her eyes inspecting Alyssa's every move. "Don't think you're anything but a useless pet," her voice cold, often scattered between phone calls or powerful social conversations. Every word was a sharp blade, cutting away small parts of Alyssa's soul. She kept her eyes down, her shoulders straight, and her body still as a statue. When guests arrived, Victoria carefully hid Alyssa away, locking her in the cramped, windowless room. Alyssa sat curled in the darkness, listening to the laughter and chatter from the living room. She tried to imagine smiling faces, beautiful clothes, and the glistening light reflected on the chandeliers. The feeling of abandonment and loneliness overwhelmed her, but Alyssa knew that to survive, she had to keep her thoughts focused on silence and submission. Some nights, after finishing all her work, Alyssa returned to her dark room, sinking into a corner with her legs pulled up to her chest. In those rare moments when she wasn't being watched, Alyssa let her mind drift a little. She imagined her mother's arms around her, her father's laughter as he told funny bedtime stories. But that feeling never lasted long. She quickly returned to reality, where memories of her family only deepened her pain and made her feel unworthy of them. Alyssa no longer expected miracles or salvation. She knew that thinking of freedom or a different life would only increase her pain when reality was so cruel. But one thing she couldn't fully extinguish was the sense of those small sparks of hope creeping into her soul. Sometimes, when night came and the mansion fell silent, she heard the wind whistling through the cracks in the doors, as if someone outside was calling her name. This feeling was too faint to believe, but strong enough to remind her that her heart was still alive. Even if only a little, hope was dangerous, but it was also the only thing Alyssa could hold on to prevent herself from completely losing her sense of self. She learned to hide it, to nurture it as a deep secret so that no one, not even Victoria, could discover that a tiny light of freedom still flickered within her. But then everything changed on what seemed like an ordinary day, when Alyssa's life took an unexpected turn. That morning, the air in the mansion felt heavier than ever. Victoria seemed irritable, her cold eyes flashing with anger as she ordered Alyssa to pick up food from a nearby restaurant. This was a rare task that allowed Alyssa to step out of the gloomy house, if only for a few minutes. Her heart pounded in her chest, nervousness blending with excitement as the mansion's front door opened. Sunlight flooded her face, the light she hadn't felt in months. Stepping outside, Alyssa felt her legs tremble, her head lowered out of reflexive habit. The sounds around her, from the birds singing to the passing cars, seemed like magical whispers that almost made her forget the fear running through her veins. As she approached the gate, a young delivery man with a bright smile waited for her. His name was Michael, a warm-hearted young man with eyes full of genuine concern. Michael's smile lasted only a moment as his eyes landed on Alyssa, the thin, pale girl with frightened eyes and bruises on her fragile arms. He was shocked, and a sense of worry overtook him. Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle but tinged with concern. Alyssa flinched at his words, her eyes widening with fear before quickly looking down. She shook her head slightly, her trembling hands taking the bag of food from him. The brief touch brought her a warmth she had forgotten long ago, but immediately fear rose up, drowning out every other feeling. Alyssa remembered Victoria's warning, never talk to anyone outside the house, and if Victoria found out she had broken the rule, the punishment would be harsher than ever. Michael stood there, his gaze fixed on Alyssa as she turned to go back inside. He noticed the strange signs, her shaking hands, the anxious look on her young face, which should have been bright and happy. An uneasy feeling gripped him, like an alarm bell ringing in his mind. Inside the mansion, Victoria sat waiting, her sharp gaze fixed on Alyssa as she entered the room. She sat in a velvet armchair, tapping her fingers on the armrest, a sign of her impatience and irritation. "What took you so long out there?" she asked, her voice cold, sharp as a blade. Alyssa dared not look up, setting the food bag down on the table and stepping back, her small body trying to shrink into the background to avoid drawing more attention. Victoria stared at Alyssa for a long moment, narrowing her eyes as if trying to read the girl's mind. She took a deep breath, her gaze sharp, looking for any sign of something amiss. Alyssa felt sweat trickle down her back, but she kept absolutely silent, her eyes downcast and her hands clenched behind her back to hide their trembling. Outside, Michael had not left, a strong urge told him he couldn't ignore what he had just witnessed. The girl's eyes, filled with fear and silent pleading, haunted him. He stepped out of his car, finding a discreet spot near the living room window, quietly observing through a thin crack in the curtain. He couldn't believe his eyes when he saw Victoria's figure, her face cold as ice, her gaze filled with power as she looked at Alyssa without a trace of compassion. Michael couldn't turn away, his heart raced, a feeling of tension and fear creeping in. He pulled out his phone, his hands trembling, and recorded a short video, capturing the scene in the living room where Alyssa stood still as a statue while Victoria interrogated her with a cruel gaze. A surge of determination rose within him, he had to do something, he couldn't turn away. Michael held the phone tightly, capturing every second of Victoria standing over Alyssa with that cold gaze while the girl could only bow her head, trembling in fear. The image felt like a knife piercing his heart, stirring both anger and helplessness. He knew that directly confronting Victoria was dangerous, as she was not only wealthy but also had deep connections. Ignoring Alyssa's silent plea for help was impossible for him. Once the video was recorded, Michael returned to his car, sitting motionless for a long while. His hands shook as he watched the video replay, each frame etched into his mind. These images were clear evidence of the brutality Alyssa endured, the absolute loneliness in a world filled only with fear and control. He knew that if he didn't act now, she would remain trapped in that hell forever. Michael took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. Posting the video could put him in danger, but he understood that he couldn't stay silent. With courage and determination, he wrote a brief but powerful caption, "This is what happens behind closed doors." His finger trembled as he pressed upload, knowing this decision would not only change his life but could save Alyssa from cruelty. Within hours, the video began to spread at an incredible speed. The views skyrocketed, and thousands of shares appeared across social media platforms. Comments flooded in from all over the world, filled with outrage and sympathy. "I can't believe this is happening," one person commented. "We need to do something immediately," another replied. The anger, shock, and desire for action spread like wildfire through the online community. Child protection organizations, journalists, and influential figures quickly got involved. Urgent calls were made, information about Victoria's mansion was collected and examined, and the long-hidden secrets of her life began to unravel. Details of her power and hidden connections were brought to light. Authorities focused on investigating the powerful woman, suspecting she might be hiding other secrets as well. In his small apartment, Michael sat watching the screen, his eyes wide as he saw the comments and messages pouring in every second. He read through the messages of support, with many people pledging to do everything possible to help Alyssa. The feeling of worry still weighed on him, knowing his actions could put both him and the girl in danger, but he also felt a bit of relief, realizing he had done the right thing. He had brought Alyssa's story to light. Meanwhile, Alyssa had no idea about the storm brewing outside. She continued her tasks in silence, trying to avoid any attention from Victoria. Inside the mansion, Victoria remained confident that her world was under absolute control. She paced through the living room, casting cold glances at Alyssa, oblivious to the fact that everything was about to change forever. At the same time, Alyssa's parents, John and Sarah, who had never given up hope of finding their daughter, saw the video. Sarah sat up, her hands shaking as she covered her mouth to hold back tears upon recognizing her daughter's gaunt face. John stood beside her, his eyes filled with pain and determination. "That's our daughter, Sarah," he said, his voice hoarse, a mix of sorrow and hope rising within him. They didn't hesitate for another second, immediately contacting the authorities and providing all the information they had about Alyssa and their 5-year search. The storm of justice spread across social media, prompting the media to swarm and authorities to take action. An emergency response plan was set into motion as law enforcement gathered enough evidence to obtain a search warrant for Victoria's mansion. The mansion, long a fortress for Victoria, now became the center of an unprecedented investigation. In the final hours before action was taken, Victoria remained oblivious, confident that she held absolute power in her hands. But an unexpected knock on the door would soon shatter the perfect world she had created, and the truth about what happened behind closed doors would no longer be hidden. As the first light of dawn pierced through the thick mist over the city, a rare scene unfolded outside Victoria's mansion, a line of police cars with flashing lights, vehicles from child protection organizations, and reporters crowded the road. Cameras clicked continuously, and video cameras pointed directly at the large closed gate, creating a tense, suffocating atmosphere. People from all around gathered, many unable to hide their shock and curiosity as they learned about the viral video. John and Sarah stood at the front of the crowd, their hands clasped so tightly their knuckles turned white. They couldn't conceal the anxiety and hope flooding their eyes. It had been years since they lost track of Alyssa, and in each passing moment, the anticipation and fear tore at their hearts. Every preparation, every prayer from the past 5 years was now funneled into this critical moment. Inside the spacious mansion, Victoria enjoyed her breakfast in the usual calm atmosphere. She had no idea that just steps away, a storm of justice was ready to crash down. When the doorbell rang, she frowned, placed her coffee cup down, her eyes flashing with irritation. She walked to the door with an air of authority and pride, oblivious to the fact that her absolute control was about to be threatened. The door opened, revealing a group of police officers with stern, unwavering expressions. The lead officer, calm yet resolute, raised a search warrant. "We have a legal warrant to search this property," he said, leaving no room for protest in his tone. Victoria's face darkened for a moment. She quickly regained her icy exterior, but tension was visibly etched into every line on her face. "This is an abuse of power." "You have no right," she began. But the officer interrupted her without hesitation. "This is a legal search warrant. Please cooperate," he said with a firmness that left no room for argument. A wave of worry washed over her as she saw the serious looks of the officers and the crowd gathering outside. She knew this time the situation was beyond her control. The police officers began dividing up to search every room and corner of the vast mansion. Victoria followed them, trying to maintain her composure, though her eyes betrayed her panic. She spoke mechanically, repeating meaningless defenses. "You're making a serious mistake. There's no child here." But none of the officers believed her words. The video and Alyssa's pleading eyes had said it all. Alyssa sat in a dark room, her sharp ears picking up every usual sound from outside. She heard the hurried footsteps, the clear command spoken by strong voices she had never heard in this house. A sense of confusion and fear flooded her, but at the same time, a faint glimmer of hope flickered, making her heart beat faster. She shivered, keeping herself completely silent, afraid to make a sound. A young officer, seemingly new to the team, stopped in front of a small wooden door at the end of the hallway, where the light barely reached, highlighting its old, worn-out look. He paused, listening to sounds inside, then slowly turned the handle. The door opened, and the hallway light streamed into the dark room, illuminating the sight of a thin girl, her wide eyes filled with fear. It was Alyssa, the girl who had been missing for 5 years. The officer's voice softened, steady and gentle. "You don't have to be afraid anymore. We're here to help you." Alyssa froze for a moment, her eyes brimming with tears, unable to believe what she had just heard. She felt her legs give out, but in that moment, she knew this was not a dream. Her hands trembled, tears streaming down her cheeks. She tried to stand, but her frail legs couldn't support her weight. "Take it easy, you're safe now," the officer reassured, stepping in and bending down gently, taking her hand. Alyssa could no longer hold back her tears, sobbing openly as the officer's warmth enveloped her, a feeling she hadn't felt in years. Outside, when news spread that Alyssa had been found, a wave of emotion swept over everyone. Sarah and John, their eyes full of tears, stepped forward in overwhelming anticipation. When they saw Alyssa being led out of the mansion, their hearts nearly burst. She looked thin and pale, but she was still their daughter. Sarah rushed forward, her sobs uncontrollable, hugging Alyssa tightly. John knelt beside them, his arms embracing both mother and daughter. "Mom, Dad," Alyssa cried out in a voice filled with emotion, words she thought she would never speak again. The three of them held each other tightly, tears streaming down, cries blending with joy and sorrow, dissolving the distance that 5 years of separation had created. The crowd watched, many unable to hold back their tears, cameras capturing every touching moment, marking a memory they would never forget. Victoria stood there stunned, her face pale as she saw everything unfold beyond her control. She couldn't believe her eyes, her sense of power, her long-held pride, shattered in an instant. An officer approached, reading her a warrant for her arrest on charges of abuse and illegal detention. Victoria tried to scream her last offenses, but they drowned amid the cheers and the endless flashing cameras. The crowd's eyes were filled only with contempt and anger. No one had any hesitation about the once powerful woman. Alyssa was led out of the mansion, her weak legs stepping down the cold stone steps, feeling the warm sunlight on her skin. She blinked in disbelief. The sun, something she hadn't seen fully for years, now felt brighter and warmer than ever. It felt like a dream, but it was a dream in which she had awakened in the loving embrace of her parents. She was free, and the light of the new day bore witness to that moment, the moment Alyssa returned to the world, returned to life, and returned to irreplaceable love. But the journey to reclaim peace didn't end there. As the warm sunlight fell on her thin face, Alyssa felt a vague sense of security, but deep down, her soul was still submerged in haunting memories and painful scars. John and Sarah brought Alyssa home, a home that had become a place filled with hope and waiting over the past 5 years. Now that house echoed with Alyssa's soft footsteps, filling the void left by loss. However, her return wasn't a simple happy ending. It was the beginning of a long journey to heal the wounds that Alyssa had endured in her prolonged captivity. In the early days, Alyssa lived with hesitation and fear. Every sudden sound, like the creak of a window or footsteps on wooden floors, startled her. Her wide eyes filled with nameless fear. Sarah often woke up in the middle of the night, stepping into Alyssa's room to find her daughter curled up in the corner of her bed, her eyes haunted and empty. She gently approached, holding Alyssa in her arms, whispering comforting words. "I'm here, honey." "It's okay," she said, her voice trembling but filled with love. But Alyssa would remain silent, her body tense as if waiting for something dreadful to happen. John, a patient and loving father, spent each day with his daughter, knowing it would take a long time for Alyssa to feel safe again. He told her stories, drew pictures, and engaged in small activities with her, just to rekindle the joy that had been stolen from her. But not all his efforts bore fruit. Sometimes Alyssa would sit quietly, her eyes looking out the window, weary and uneasy, her mind lost in painful memories from which she couldn't escape. Over time, with her family's patience, Alyssa began to open up. One afternoon, while Sarah was preparing dinner, she heard Alyssa's soft laughter coming from the living room. It was a sound she hadn't heard in years. Full of tears, her heart felt like it would burst, and she couldn't help but shed tears of happiness. John joined her, watching Alyssa giggle while watching a cartoon. It was a small moment, but one full of hope, a sign that she was slowly stepping out of the darkness. After a few weeks, psychologists started visiting the house to help Alyssa confront the trauma she had endured. The initial therapy sessions were challenging. Alyssa sat still, her gaze still carrying fear and unease, answering questions only with nods or shakes of her head. But over time, the experts gained her trust, helping her feel safer in sharing her story. At times when talking about what Victoria had done, her voice trembled and her small hands clasped tightly together, but she knew that speaking up was part of healing. Sarah and John were always present during the sessions, their eyes filled with empathy and love. They knew that healing Alyssa's soul wasn't only the doctor's responsibility, but a journey for the whole family. In the evenings, they sat together in the living room, telling stories, drawing pictures, playing simple games to help Alyssa rediscover the joy and curiosity of life. Gradually, Alyssa began to join in her responses, going from hesitant to more natural and sometimes even accompanied by shy smiles. But the journey wasn't always easy. Some nights, Alyssa would wake up from a nightmare, cold sweat dripping down her forehead as she screamed in panic. John and Sarah, tired and worried, would rush to her side, holding her close, whispering reassurances until she returned to sleep. Such moments reminded them that recovery was a long road filled with challenges and tears. While Alyssa slowly reclaimed her life, Victoria faced the consequences of her actions. Victoria's trial became a focal point of public attention as disturbing details of her cruelty and imprisonment of Alyssa were brought to light. Witnesses, video evidence, and testimonies from psychological experts revealed her true nature. Her lawyer's defenses grew weak against the undeniable truth. The final sentence handed to Victoria was severe, ensuring she would never harm anyone again. The crowd outside the courthouse cheered upon hearing the verdict, a sense of justice spreading everywhere. But for Alyssa, it wasn't about revenge. She didn't feel triumphant, but rather a necessary closure. Knowing that Victoria was punished gave her relief, as if a part of the burden in her heart had been lifted, allowing her to move forward. With time, Alyssa found joy in simple things. She began to draw colorful pictures, play in the garden, and explore the world with the curiosity of a child. Laughter and conversations gradually returned to the house. She knew that life would never fully return to what it was, but she also realized that with her family's love and patience, she could rebuild herself stronger and more hopeful than ever. As time passed, Alyssa found safety in the little things, from the morning bird song to the sunlight filtering through the trees outside the window. Every day, waking up in her mother's warm embrace and her father's protection, she felt more certain that she had truly come home. The day Alyssa returned to school was a challenging yet meaningful milestone. She couldn't hide her anxiety about entering a new environment with unfamiliar faces. Sarah and John stood beside her, encouraging her with loving smiles and whispered reassurances. "Don't worry, we'll always be with you," John said, his hand squeezing hers, creating a strong, reassuring bond. Entering the classroom, Alyssa was introduced by her teacher, a gentle middle-aged woman with warm eyes. She gently placed her hand on Alyssa's shoulder, introducing her to the class. At first, Alyssa couldn't leave her mother, her gaze lost and hesitant. But then the curious glances gradually turned into friendly smiles. A group of kids invited her to sit nearby and play, helping her feel less alone. For the first time in years, she felt welcomed without fear or pressure. The first days of school weren't easy. Whenever the school bell rang or a door slammed, Alyssa would startle, her eyes wide, searching for signs of danger. But her teacher and friends always reassured her gently, making her feel safer. Each day, Alyssa gradually learned to open up. Sometimes she would smile with her friends, even if just a gentle smile, yet it held hope and acceptance. At home, Sarah and John did everything to create a space full of love. Family dinners were not just meals but moments to share stories about the day, talk about the new things Alyssa learned, and the interesting things she experienced. One night, as they sat around the dinner table, Alyssa suddenly said, "Today I drew a picture of our family." Both Sarah and John paused, their eyes filled with emotion. It was the first time Alyssa spoke about family so naturally, not in tears or worry. Their evenings slowly became precious moments filled with laughter and warmth. Sarah and John often read letters from strangers sent after hearing Alyssa's story, messages of encouragement, stories about patience and love from all around the world. Alyssa sat listening to her parents read, her eyes shining with a rare sparkle. There are so many people who care about you, love you, even though they've never met you, John said, his voice warm. Meanwhile, Victoria, who once haunted Alyssa, now faced her well-deserved punishment. The trial, which lasted for weeks, exposed the full extent of her cruelty, not only to Alyssa but to many others. Testimonies, videos, and irrefutable evidence forced her to pay the price. Victoria was no longer a powerful woman but an outcast, shunned by society. Her punishment was not only a legal sentence but also the hatred and disdain from the community. Alyssa didn't attend the trial, but her parents kept her informed of the outcome. Sarah sat beside her daughter, her eyes gentle. "You don't have to worry about her anymore, Alyssa. She can't hurt you or anyone else ever again," she said, wrapping her arms around her daughter. Alyssa didn't reply, but she felt a quiet relief wash over her. Victoria's end was a closed door, allowing her to move forward without living in fear. In the years that followed, Alyssa slowly returned to being a child filled with curiosity and joy. She started learning to draw, joining extracurricular activities at school, and even trying out an instrument. These things didn't just bring her happiness, they opened doors to new dreams and hopes she hadn't thought she could have one day. While painting a colorful picture under a large tree in the park, Alyssa paused, looking around, feeling the breeze, the bird song, and the laughter of friends around her. For the first time in years, she felt completely at peace. Alyssa's life wasn't just about recovery but growth. From a girl once trapped in darkness, Alyssa had stepped into the light, believing she could face any challenge. She knew that there would still be obstacles and painful memories that would sometimes return, but with her family's support, she had learned not to let them control her. Alyssa found her smile, her joy, and her confidence, things she once thought lost forever. With each step forward, she knew she was no longer the captive girl but a strong, free, and hopeful young woman. Alyssa had come home, not only to her family but also to herself, ready to write new chapters of her life filled with light and love that would never fade. Alyssa found her smile, her joy, and her confidence, things she once thought lost forever. Her story is a powerful reminder that even when submerged in darkness and suffering, with love, patience, and hope, we can overcome any hardship and rediscover ourselves. Alyssa is not just a survivor, she's a symbol of resilience, inner strength, and the capacity to heal from the deepest wounds. Alyssa's journey reminds us that no matter how difficult life becomes, there is always light at the end of the tunnel and hearts ready to help. The love and support from family and community are irreplaceable, and we must protect and uplift each other, especially the vulnerable souls who need shelter the most. If you feel inspired by Alyssa's story, remember that our care and kindness can change someone's life. Continue to spread compassion and hope, helping create a better world for everyone. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to follow more touching and inspirational stories. Your support encourages us to continue sharing these meaningful journeys. Thank you for being with us and always keep faith in love and hope.